Hi everybody, I'm here with Don Taylor. Don, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi Joe, good to be with you. I'm Donald H. Taylor, Don Taylor. I'm the chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, also the Learning Technologies Conference, and I think about learning, and I try to share those thoughts with people, and I try to get people together. So I think and organise in the world of workplace learning.
And I think you're in a good place for us to have this conversation about L&D and the business. And there's so many of these conversations happening over the last few years, and rightly so. And our main topic today is, as an L&D professional, your number one priority should be engaging with the business. Is that just a statement of fact, or is there something for us to discuss around that?
It's a statement. I think it's wrong. And the reason I think it's wrong is that if we're thinking that our number one priority should be to engage with the business, we're coming at it completely the wrong way around. We're not here to engage with the business. We are part of the business. So if we're talking about engaging with the business, it means that we're outside it. So that can't be right.
Semantics, though, Don. Is it not?
Well, okay.
Is it
And
semantics,
perhaps
and we should just be focusing on the business regardless of our location?
if we're talking, the trouble with semantics is that it's easy to put something in a box because of semantics, but words matter. They affect how we think about things. They affect how we express and carry ourselves. So if we're talking about engaging with the business to other people in the business, then it could sound to them like we are outside the business, and certainly to ourselves, it portrays to ourselves an idea of an organization or a function that is outside the business trying to engage with it. No, we are part of the business and we've got to be part of it. And for me, this comes down to the difference between a supply side and a demand side approach in learning and development. So the supply side approach is traditionally what we've had. And that's what engaging with the business uh, portrays, is this idea that I've got something, I'm creating it according to the supply procedures that I've got. Typically, it's a product, it's a course, it's some form of output, and I'm going to then engage with the business and sell it to the business. Well, if you're a vendor, that's fine, but we're not vendors. We're people who are supporting and part of the business. We should be engaged with the business in the same way that fish swims in water. It doesn't ask what water is, it surrounds them. That's what we should be doing.
I love that analogy of the fish in the water.
I'm
That's
sure
really
I'm
good.
sure it's not original.
And I want to pick up on this point about the difference between being an L&D team within an organization and being an external vendor. And obviously, there are huge differences. How can we, as vendors, those of people who are watching today, or freelancers or
Yeah.
contractors, make the business a priority as well as even though they're technically separate, how can they immerse themselves in that in the same way?
That's a really good question, Joe. With the Learning and Performance Institute, do a lot of work talking with CLOs, and quite regularly we have a panel where we get chief learning officers together, three or four of them, in front of an audience of about 30 to 40 vendors. And it's pretty interesting. We say to them, we talk around a whole bunch of stuff, and then we get to the key questions, which are like, how can we sell to you? And the answer is always the same. It is be patient, build a relationship. It's so frustrating because, of course, I've worked on the vendor side. You've got numbers to hit, but your numbers in the short term are one thing, but a relationship with a client is something completely different. I've worked with a number of vendors and I've observed a number of vendors who are very successful. And the ones that are very successful are the ones who really, really take the time to understand the client. And I remember one LMS vendor I was quite familiar with what they were doing, and they did a fantastic job of going in, yeah, selling the product, but they didn't have Team A sell the product and then Team D come in to deliver it. Team A sold the product, and it was the same people who came in and then supported afterwards with the implementation. And for them, because they had a very strong marketing as well as technical background, it wasn't just a matter of, yeah, here, we're going to install it for you. It was a matter of, we're going to install this for you. We're going to make sure that your people are engaged, enthusiastic about it, and ready to use it. And it made a huge difference to their relationship with the client and the client's experience. So taking that time to really, to engage for the vendors is crucial, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think especially when you're on the smaller side of the
Yeah.
businesses, you almost have to do those different roles. The larger the business, the more segmented and siloed that can get. So what about with regards those smaller organisations? And this, we might be straying off the topic a little, but I know from running my own company where there's two of us, I have to do marketing, I have to do sales, I have to be the L&D person. Luckily, I've got someone else now to focus on the accounts and things like that. So what can we take about this around this idea of the business being the priority, but as a smaller vendor,
Yep.
having to go across all those skills? What insight can you give us there from your experience, Don?
Bear in mind that I work for myself quite a lot, and effectively, although I do all these different roles, effectively I work for myself. Um, the key thing, it comes down to relationships. So yeah, you've got to do all those things, but ultimately, I mean, I mess up all the time. I make mistakes. I forget to do things. No, don't nod, Joe. You should say no, no, no.
I do too. That's what I was nodding at. I was empathizing.
I feel better now. And
You're perfect in my eyes, Don.
response. And the thing is, everyone will do. You're always going to have difficulties, and you may have difficulty with implementation. You may have difficulty with something you provided to somebody. If you have no social or personal capital to draw on at those moments, then it's down to a straightforward transactional relationship. You did this, we need to get it sorted out. On the other hand, if you've got the capital, the social capital, then you can say, oh, I'm sorry I screwed up. How can we fix it? Right, well, let's do this and this and this. And then, of course, you overperform and you're going to definitely try and win back and get back into people's good books because you feel bad about it. Those relationships are what business really is founded on more than anything else. So yes, you've got to do all the other stuff, but the priority has to be your relationship with the people you're working with.
And I think by building those relationships, you then learn from others. You might find that somebody else will support you or help you or outsource as and when you've got the resources to do so. Certainly my experience. So let's move back to this topic, this conversation around, as an L&D professional, our number one priority should be engaging with the business. So if we're saying it's not just semantics, and by using this specific terminology, we're separating ourselves from the business, either as a vendor or an internal individual or team, what kind of focus should we be having? How can we switch from that I must engage with the business through to I'm the fish in the water of the business?
I like that. It's a great analogy. I think that we need to get out of the office, and it sounds terribly glib, but I talk about learning and development, getting information about the business, or rather getting information about the learning and development environment in a 2x2 grid. So you can get information from the L&D profession, you can get information from the business, and you could do it inside and outside for both. So getting information from inside the learning and development spectrum and doing that inside the business means you're inside your own zone. You're in the L&D office, fine. And you've got to be on top of that. You've got to be on top of your internal procedures and everything. But that's a hygiene factor. We expect ourselves to be expert in what we do. Otherwise, why are we doing it? You've also got to get information from the business from inside the business. And that's where you've got to get out of your office and go out and you've got to engage with people. And that means not going and talking about what learning they need, but going out and listening to people about what they're doing in the business. So that's two things there. Firstly, not talking, you're listening. Secondly, the subject is the business, not the learning. And that's really important. If you go out and you listen effectively, then you're going to be learning about the business. And then the conversations start being about how does my role fit into what you're doing? I mean, again, it's about relationships. I'm not saying anything here that's really new, but what I'm suggesting is that it requires an effort both to separate yourself from the constant urgent tasks of running a learning and development department. I'm not trivializing that. What I'm saying is that this thing is so important that it's worthwhile taking the hit on getting some of those things done, put them to one side, decide not to do them, and go and spend the time listening to people in as structured or unstructured a way as makes sense for you to really understand how they're working and how the L&D department works with that. So that's how you get to be a fish swimming in the water, is by going out and having conversations with people. And I know people who've actually done that very successfully, going on road trips with people. So they've gone out with the sales guys and the team. They've gone out and listened to the engineers and sat with them in their cars while they're driving to places. They've engaged in meetings just as a fly on the wall, and it's been tremendously powerful. Also running focus groups, getting people together to examine, let's say you're doing an onboarding program, get people together 3 months after they come into the organization. So what was it like for you when you came into the organization? Let's look at a graph of your emotions over time. How did you feel there? That sort of engagement in a very structured way is also possible. Not with the end of providing a course at the end of it necessarily, but understanding how do we work together in this organization. It's a very long answer, Joe. Does it make sense?
It makes sense to me, and I think you've picked up some really nice things that people can do to spark some ideas of what's relevant for them in their business. I've got one last question for you before we wrap up. And what if I'm an L&D team member and I'm thinking, yes, Don, loving all of this, really agree with it, totally with you, but my manager isn't. My manager is still transactional. My head of department is still very much in that order taking place of L&D. Other than leaving my job, which is something that I often advocate, is just like, if it's not changing, you've got to change. What things could I do as an L&D team member without rocking the boat too much and getting fired, but to progress this on a step?
Okay, so there's two things. Firstly, I totally agree with you about the idea of leaving the job. I'm not trivializing that. Again, it's a tough call, but I've a long time ago I was talking about the training ghetto, and we'll talk about the training ghetto being one particular type of things. But the other opposite the training ghetto in my quadrant was the unsung prophets. It comes from Matthew in the Bible. The prophet is never honoured in his own country, and so you can be singing the song of the need to engage with the business, but in your own country you're not listened to at all. But outside other countries you will be listened to. So go to the other country. But I also say, as well as leaving your job, something else you can do is to find the person who gets it. Your manager is focused on transactions, fine. But there's somebody else in the organisation. There's a manager there. There's a person there who isn't in the L&D department, who does get it, and work with that person. And unless you're in a particularly staid organisation, there's going to be that person. You just got to go and find them, work with them, and then two things will happen. Either you will find that person is now evangelizing for you and is saying, this is a great way of doing things, and the way learning and development is organized in the business changes, or you develop great experience and you get yourself to the point whereby your CV is much stronger to go and get a job elsewhere. But typically I've found that when you get somebody on board internally and they see what you're doing, they're the people who will take that message and take it out to the business in the language of the business as an advocate. Then your manager's going to have to shift.
Loving that and completely agree with it. Don, thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. As always, I feel like we could chat all day on this topic. And where can people find you on social media and your blog and stuff like that to find more?
Thank you, Joe. I'm Donald H. Taylor on everything. So Donald H. Taylor on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, on my blog as well. So yeah, Donald H. Taylor. I think I'm the first page on Google. You can't get away from me.
Well, you can't get better than that, Don. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.